Hello, Ambassador R. Exor. I am Ruwert, the Krellian Republic delegate. I hear that the Groxitolian government is struggling to determine whether to join the Galactic Compact. It's certainly a big step, but I would like, if I may, to tell you a story. Ordinarily, a person in my position should probably extol the virtues of my people or of the benefits of membership, but I think something else will better elucidate my thoughts. Please bear with me, for it requires backstory, and I have been known to drone. Several hundred years ago, my people, the Krell, had only just about figured basic spaceflight. We had traveled to the fifth planet in our system, our S being the second, but no further. Advancement had slowed, the cost too high for the return. Tensions between the major nations were feverish, and a seemingly unavertible war loomed, leaving funding for space exploration in a veritable drought. We had, of course, dreamt of faster than light travel, in laboratories and fiction both, as I am sure is common across the universe. We were no closer to attaining FTL than we had been 50 years prior. We had all but given up on space as a viable area of research, and began to look inward, seeking desperately both for a way to prevent war and a way to win it if it came to pass. Suddenly, a strange anomaly was detected in our system between the last two planets, yet locked in place, not orbiting our star, but simply tracking along with it. Look, I'm a diplomat, not a scientist. I don't fully understand everything that went on, but it was determined that it was a wormhole. Yes, hole that links to another place. This invigorated the people and news media and had a calming effect on our species as a whole, averting war as scientists from opposing nations worked together to craft new vessels with enough thrust to give more options for launch windows. The phenomenon appeared from nowhere and could disappear just as suddenly, given our admittedly lax theoretical understanding at the time, which posited that such objects would be unstable. We needed to get there quickly. I think, though, that perhaps we worked so fast more to capitalize on this second chance to prevent an unprecedented bloodshed. But I digress. Brave males from our three largest nations, 2 apiece, volunteered to go. Well, I'm not sure the Hooter were quite so voluntary as history records, but who knows? Each was furnished with a ship and sent off to the wormhole. Their duty was to enter, scan, and then return through the hole. This, of course, did not occur as we had hoped. One came home having missed a transfer window, never making it to the wormhole. The rest were never heard from again once they passed the threshold. See, we did not understand at the time that wormholes are very odd. Point A may connect to point B, but that did not mean that point B connects to point A. There can indeed be no wormhole entrance at point B, or the entrance at point B, or the entrance at point BB, a drop a traveler at point C instead. Not to mention that the destination changes as a function of elapsia, the ever-incrementing elapsed time since the start of the universe. We know now, of course, that wormhole travel is an effective lottery, that it cannot be harnessed for transportation networks. I'm sure that you will be furnished with more detailed scientific analysis in the event that you join. In any event, with no communication nor return, we decided to leave well enough alone. Despite the failure, the brief period of working together had led to greater contact between the major nations on our planet, and this continued after the people pressured their governments. Nobody was itching to fight. We settled into trade and technological advancement, at first without further development in space. The younglings, however, who had followed with excitement the wormhole saga, grew up with a keen interest in all things space. I know from your provided cultural database that you have a story called, what was it? The Castaway of the Golden Horn? Yes, we had several stories written in a similar vein, dreams of the valorous males who went through the wormhole, lost yet surviving on some deserted planet, living on exotic fauna and flora. These stories inspired generations of younglings, And there were always fresh students in aerospace fields and up-and-coming youthful politicians willing to grant funding to fulfill their younglinghood dreams. The Hooter Nation collapsed into many smaller states, leaving 2 super nations, but things were mostly peaceful between them. I'll fast forward a little. I can see you getting bored. Apologies. In short, after a century, we were ready for our first EFTL test. Once again, volunteers from the major nations went up and shot off into the endless ocean. These, however, all returned. We had succeeded. And in fact, we achieved first contact on that very day, something we quickly regretted. See, our neighbors turned out to be vile, treacherous people, hostile from the off. After parsing each other's languages and beginning cultural exchange, we realized that their species was a uniform theocracy, one which believed in sapient sacrifice. Our lack of interest in participating in their religion caused them to cut off communications. No matter, we thought. We continued exploring our region of space and found 3 other species. One was a trading race, the Corals, not too awful to deal with, but not people you could rely on. We shared information with them, but relations never went anywhere. One of the others was outright impossible to communicate with due to incompatible perceptions of the universe. Something to do with experiencing time itself differently. The last one eventually threatened to declare war on us over some perceived slight. We retreated to our system and gave up on long-distance space travel. Another century passed. We had occasional dealings with the Corals, but for the most part, we felt more alone than ever. Know what is worse than being alone? Being stuck in the corner in a busy room of people you cannot understand. Rather suddenly, we received reports of a very large space fleet dropping out of HFY at the edge of our system. Initial reports stated that several of these ships were gargantuan in size and covered in what could only be weapons. There were around 30 ships in total. We feared the worst. A hostile force, an invasion or enslavement. The ships traveled to the center of the system. They moved in a direct line. Your people are new to FTL and sublights, so I'm sure you can appreciate the shock of that. It's quite simply inefficient to travel in a straight line from a fuel perspective because of the amount of thrust required to overcome the need to orbit, hence the need in primitive space travel for launch windows and transfer orbits. For straight-line travel, fuel in a traditional sense needs to become utterly irrelevant. Whilst EFTL allowed us to move in such a manner in a larger sense, using it would be far too dangerous within the system because of its inherent instability over such short distances. Even if we were to do so, we would never use EFTL whilst moving inwardly in the direction of the star, only outwardly in the direction of empty space. Yet these ships had dropped in about 1 light day away, waited in place for 1 full revolution of our planet, and then moved at speeds just below the speed of light, directly towards us. We could tell we were outmatched. The nations disagreed on what to do. One began mobilizing for war, another quietly waited. Yet the ship stopped at the 4th planet. We received a radio signal. The scientists, of course, scrambled to triangulate it, to verify that it had come from where we thought it had. See, the voice was speaking a somewhat outdated rural dialect of my Cotton's language. Nobody spoke like that anymore, save for the elderly and technologically illiterate farm boys. Greetings to the Krell. We are humanity. We have a matter of importance to discuss. We request permission to approach the 2nd planet in your system and humbly ask for you to send an ambassadorial delegation to our ship upon our arrival. Yes, it was humanity, co-founders of the Galactic Compact and the largest faction within it. We were, of course, baffled. Why had they arrived in such overwhelming force only to politely ask permission? Why had they waited at the edge of the system for a day? We were suspicious still, of course. Our military analysts theorized that they could have had some weird pre-war ritual requiring them to declare it in person. and it played on the back of the politicians' minds. Why did they know our language? Had it been the primary dialect they said then, that might be understandable because it would be a common manner of speech on the planetary network, or the wireless, our audiovisual broadcasting medium of the day, which we knew leaked signals far into space. But for aliens to descend from the endless ocean sounding like old folk, or, to borrow a human term, country bumpkins, was disconcerting. How long had they been spying on us for them to speak in such a way? We had no choice. We could only comply. We granted permission, and the human ships drifted towards us and established themselves in orbit. A selection of diplomats and linguists from the major nations were thrown onto a shuttle and sent up to meet. They looked dazed and upset. Here, hold on. I have video of it on my datapod. You're there, okay, yes. See? That's them getting onto the shuttle. Looks like they're going to their execution, doesn't it? I can't honestly imagine how they felt in that moment. Anyway, they got close, and a small interceptor ship came out to meet them. It radioed their shuttle and told them to follow it to the docking bay, and of course, they complied. Their journals after the experience reflect their initial thoughts on meeting the humans, describe them as weird-looking, with strange mannerisms which prevented them from knowing if they were being welcoming or not. Looking back, the humans likely felt the same way, just as tense. The humans introduced themselves and, for the life of me, I cannot remember any of the names of the people on either side. Feels sort of bad to admit that. But oh well. They began to tell our delegates a story. A story about a male named Root, who dropped into the space near the edge of their system, near the Oort cloud. Funny name, only reason I recall it, and found himself with no way home, who they discovered and recovered and took back to Arth. How they worked with him for months to understand his language, which turned out to be that rural, old-time dialect they were speaking, and befriended him. How Root had lived out a long life on Arth, their home, and had become well-known and respected. How they had wanted to come and meet before now, but felt that they could not both because they were uncertain about our system's exact location, and because Root had explained that we had not achieved FTL flight yet. Within their vast body of fiction, a consensus had been reached about the importance of not meddling in the development of pre-FTL civilizations, and this policy informed their official decision-making. In fact, they even practiced something similar on their home planet, where there is still an island of people with little to no technological development to this day, who are left to their own devices until such time as they choose to explore. Sorry, tangent. Back on track. They told of how Arth was over 33,000 light-years away, on the other side of the great black hole in the center of the galaxy, and how news of our eventual achievement of FTL had taken many years to reach them, passed along through various trading factions like the Corals, along with our coordinates. How it had taken them a little over 7 years to reach us with their then meager FTL jump distance capacity, and how they waited at the edge of our system for a day to allow time for the light to reach us so that we would be aware of them and not be shocked by their sudden arrival in orbit of our planet. How Root had re-imbued humanity with its lost passion to journey the stars and seek out new life after having been reserved for many years because their immediate neighbors were warlike and cruel. 2 wars, despite their victory, had been enough to make them step back from the galaxy. War had been unkind to them, but it had afforded them the impetus to develop better APL capabilities and weaponry for defensive purposes. After explaining all of this, a signal was given, and the conference room door opened, and in strolled 6 humans, guiding a glass box which was hovering at half their height above the floor on a floating tray. In a somber tone, they explained how they had promised Root that he would one day rest upon the world of his ancestors. Inside the glass box was the perfectly preserved body of a male of our species. He was old, oh so very old, with deep, long laugh, lines and a fit physique for once of such advanced age. We realized then, the military ships were not here to invade us. They were this old male's funerary honor, guard. The funeral was held at the familial burial site of his ancestors, at the behest of the humans who said that it had been his wish. Vrut's relations were present, including his niece, who was herself extremely old now, being the last of our species to have met him personally. The humans insisted on something called a eulogy, which was apparently an unknown custom to our culture at the time. It is where people who knew the deceased or important people affected by their actions take a moment during the funeral to speak about their life and impact. The eulogy has been adopted as an important and sacred practice of our standard funerary rites since then. Within all cultures of our world, such was the effect. We did not have a planetary government in those days, so we thought there might be an issue with which of our leaders would speak at the eulogy, but it was decided that the head of the All-Nation Trade and Maritime Law Organization would do so, as they held a position which effectively represented the widest number of Krell nations and cultures. She was of the ethnicity of one of the major nations, but for all official capacities spoke the language of the other major nation. A sort of ongoing compromise that reduced tensions and facilitated trade. That organization would eventually merge with the major nations to create the Krellian Republic, which is the official body of our planet. Then, a very withered and leathery example of the human species spoke, of having been a young man when he met the already aged Vrut in his local drinking establishment, of how Vrut spent many long evenings speaking of his homeworld with passion over cups of sci-fi, of how he had been near constantly in awe of humanity's technological and scientific prowess, and having been able to share a few things that even the humans did not know, how he had visited most all of Arth, and seen wonders such as waterfalls and ice caps, which do not exist where we come from. How he had been comfortable in a society with similarities of worldview, and how he had spoken at length of how it felt like humanity had taken philosophies that the Krell had too and advanced them and generalized them into functioning principles. For instance, in his time the Krell had a basic concept of all are sovereign, applied to at the familial level, but the humans had taken the same principle and extended it to the individual level, allowing free opportunity to all regardless of class, language, religion, gender, sexuality, race, or even, as was relevant to him, species. In effect, all sapients are sovereign, yet another human concept that we have adopted. The man told of how Vrut had been awarded a medal by the local authorities after saving a human youngling's life when a flood swept her up and had drank cider for free for a whole week as a result, and in his inebriated state experienced his first bar fight, which he had lost due to the strength of the average human, only to find himself with even more friends afterwards. The humans value the willingness to fight, and tend not to hold grudges over the mere fact of having fought each other. Though, as an aside, if you do acquire a human's grudge, such as by hurting the weak, they maintain it zealously. The man barked heartily, in what we know now to be their manner of laughter, but which I imagine scared our people back then, as he regaled us with Vrut's first encounter with a dog, which he quickly explained was a cute and fluffy descendant of scary predators called wolf, how he had reacted. By jumping into nearby foliage and refusing to exit for several hours, but how Vrut had warmed to the creatures when a human forced him to hold a dog youngling, which had stared up, sniffed him, and then licked his face. Vrut eventually had had 2 dogs of his own, one called Pyron, that's star in our language, and the other called Desert in the human language, named for a barren geographical feature that may be found on their planet. The animal apparently had fur of similar hue. I'll tell you, if your people do join the compact, you should get yourself a dog. Mine is a Gyr, Manchpard called Yule, after another cultural import from the humans which is celebrated at year's end, and she's so adorable and affectionate. I remember when she was tiny and would stare up at me wishing for cud. Ahem. My apologies. Dogs have a strange way of making one gush. Most highly recommended. The funeral then drew to a close for our unlikely ambassador to the stars, who had built such close ties with a species without us ever knowing. The emotional impact of the eulogy was extraordinary, bringing tears to the eyes of most Krell who heard it, whether they were present or watched it on the wireless. To hear such respect towards one of theirs, from aliens no less, explains why the practice was immediately emulated. As an aside, the statistics bear out that depressive episodes after a funeral are far fewer since the introduction of eulogy. The humans say it helps with the healing process of the mind. Vroot was then carried delicately and slowly by 3 Krell and 3 high-ranking humans, by hand, and lowered into his familial tomb. This is another element of respect we learnt from humanity. Until then, our practice had been to put the coffin on a small cart and push it to the tomb. But as soon as the humans suggested manually carrying the deceased, our leaders could see the value in it. With the help of humanity's material science engineers, we built a statue over Vroot's tomb, depicting our real first contact, not the one that happened after we had developed FTL with hostile aliens, the one that happened a century before. The statue was based on video the humans provided, which showed the moment the door was opened between Vroot's capsule and their ship, appendages reaching through the space and grasping each other, warily yet hopeful. In one small step, humanity had radically improved funerals on our planet, both in what respect was shown to the dead and in the positive psychological effect upon the still living, without ever trying to alter the underlying theology or disrespecting our existing traditions and faith beliefs in Iftin, the afterlife. At the same time, they reinflated our hopes for life outside our system, provided us with a friend whilst asking nothing in return, and shared their scientific knowledge with us. And then they departed, heading on their long voyage home, beckoning us to join them when we could. The humans come from so very, very far away. Yet knowing that out there a people exist who would make such a long voyage, almost 1/10 of their lifespan when the round trip is considered, simply to fulfill a promise to one they respected. To return the body of an unknown species to its loved ones. Who would treat both the living and the dead of others with the dignity they apportioned to their own? Who would take in a truly alien being in need and provision to him a long and comfortable life of the quality to produce such deep and marked laugh lines, despite his homesickness? A people who, after turning from the galaxy in disgust, would still extend their appendages in friendship for the sake of one good person. It inspired our species to its core and made us better people. And that is why Rixur, the Groxatal, who share several philosophies with the Krell from what I can tell, should put your trust in them as we did and join the Galactic Compact. We live in a hostile universe, too hostile to go it alone. I won't go into it in depth, but a century after what I have described, when their capabilities advanced to the point that longer petal jumps allowed them to visit us in a mere month, the humans jumped in to fight with us when we were forced to war with our theocratic neighbor. Their support ended the war quickly and saved an estimated 4 billion predicted casualties. Know what their admiral said when we asked what they wanted in return? Nothing. It was the right thing to do, and it's what Vroot would have wanted. I dunno. Extend our trade agreement if you want to give us something. None living at that time had ever met Vroot, but that's the way they talk about deceased family, of all things. Vroot was family to them. The humans ask for nothing but your trust, and in return they will protect your flanks, support you, carry you, if required. They will make you better morally and ethically without condescending to you, merely by example, by acting on what is right. That the Krell have come to be respected even half as much as the humans, as we have gradually put their philosophies into practice, is a source of pride for us. Think on it while you report to your leaders. For now, I need to get back. Yule needs feeding. Maybe you could come for dinner this weekend. You can meet her and I'll whip up our national dish. Excellent. I'll contact you later.